The Special Fathers Network is thrilled to be sponsored by Rubin Law, a multi-generational law firm dedicated exclusively to serving families raising children with special needs. It's not one thing they do, it's the only thing they do. To find out more, go to rubinlaw.com, RUBIN law.com, or call 847-279-7999 and mention the Special Fathers Network for a free consultation. 847-279-7999, Rubin Law.
For my daughters, I probably missed a number of their milestones, but for David, his learning to walk, his learning to stand, to crawl, to stand, to walk, we made parties out of all of those types of things and just really, really celebrate the small things. That just, it brings joy and happiness. But really, live in the moment. Yeah, you do have to plan for the future, but just enjoy every day with your child.
That's our guest this week, Don Raineri. Don is the father of 4 children, one who has Down syndrome and another who sadly died at childbirth. We'll hear Don's family story, including his involvement in Dads of Steele, a charity dedicated to strengthening dads to be more present in their children's lives. That's all on this Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast. Here's our host, David Hirsch.
Hi, and thanks for listening to the Dad to Dad podcast, Fathers Mentoring Fathers of Children with Special Needs, presented by the Special Fathers Network.
The Special Fathers Network is a dad to dad mentoring program for fathers raising children with special needs. Through our personalized matching process, new fathers with special needs children connect with mentor fathers in a similar situation. It's a great way for dads to support dads. To find out more, go to 21stcenturydads.org.
And if you're a dad looking for help or would like to offer help, we'd be honored to have you join our closed Facebook group. Please go to facebook.com/groups and search Dad to Dad.
And now let's listen to this conversation between Don Raineri and David Hirsch.
I'm thrilled to be talking today with Don Raineri of Downers Grove, Illinois, who's a Vice President of Regulatory Affairs at Astellas, a Japanese pharmaceutical company, and is the father of 4, including one who died at birth and another with Down syndrome. Don, thank you for taking the time to do a podcast interview for the Special Fathers Network.
It's my pleasure, David. Thank you for having me.
You and your wife, Wally, have been married for 33 years and are the proud parents of 4 children, Anna, 29, Marissa, 27, and twins, Nicholas and David, who were born 22 years ago. Sadly, Nicholas died at birth, and David has Down syndrome.
Correct.
Let's start with some background. Where did you grow up? Tell me something about your family.
Yeah, so I grew up about 80 miles southwest of Chicago in a small community. The town is called Oglesby, Illinois. It's a town of about 2,000. And I was the middle child of 3. I have a sister who's 5 years older and a brother who's 20 months younger than me. It's a very rural farming, mining community. My dad was a laborer in a local mining company that manufactured cement. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. I was the first of the family to go to college. My sister did, but she went years after I did. And it was a great place to grow up, but it was also nice to get out of the small town and go to the university in Chicago.
Excellent. So I'm sort of curious to know, how would you describe your relationship with your dad?
So in my younger years, just as some important background, my dad came from a broken family. So my dad never had a very healthy relationship with his parents. He was largely raised by his 2 older sisters. And I didn't meet my grandfather until I was in junior high. And sadly, I never met my grandmother, even though she lived within a 5 to 10 mile radius of our family. So, growing up, my dad had very high expectations. Because my brother and I were so close in age, he instilled a strong sense of competition, but he wasn't warm. He wasn't warm as a dad, and I attribute that to a product of his upbringing. But interestingly, that changed very significantly later on in life as he got older, as he battled some illnesses. He became very warm and caring. He was always warm and caring with the grandchildren, but I always felt he put a lot of pressure on me and my brother to be the best that we could be, in whether it be sports or academics. And so there were some strains in the relationship growing up, but it grew into a very strong and loving relationship as I got older and married and started having my family.
Well, if I can paraphrase, it sounds like he had a good work ethic. You mentioned he was a laborer. And given his background, he did the best with what he had.
Right.
And I'm wondering, when you think about your dad, if there's an important takeaway or two, a lesson learned, or something that comes to mind when you think about your dad.
A couple of things. As you said, he was just instilled a very strong sense of work ethic in all of us. And I see that in my own children. I think it's carried through the generations. When I was in high school, my dad made both my brother and I work for a summer as a laborer in underground tunnels where rock would be mined. So you can imagine 100 degrees in these tunnels, but wearing full gear to protect yourself. It was a tough job. And I think my dad had us do that to show us what our lives could be like if we didn't pursue an education. So for me, it was a great experience that he had us do. And I think the other thing, my dad always treated everyone equally. And I think that's a very important lesson that I learned from him. He always, regardless of the challenges that he had in his life, he always had a smile on his face. He had a nickname. People called him Sunshine because he was always smiling. And I think that was something that I took very seriously as well. I never treat anyone any differently than I would treat, my family. And I think those were two very important life lessons for me.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing. You did mention that your dad's dad, you didn't meet him until you were in junior high, and the relationship was a little dysfunctional. That's my word, not yours. And I'm wondering if your other grandfather, your mom's dad, was involved in your life at all.
So my mom's father died when my mom was 5, but her mother remarried, and so her stepfather was very involved in my life. In his later years, I would mow his lawn, and I always looked forward to the weekly lawn mowings because afterwards we would sit and he would tell me stories about his life, growing up and everything. And I just found these stories to be not just great history lessons of my family, but just about life in general. So those were very meaningful discussions.
Okay. So it was your step-grandfather that you were just referring to.
Yes.
From what I remember, you took a BS at University of Illinois in pharmacy.
Correct.
And you got some more education. And what other education did you get?
So I got a doctorate in pharmacy as well. So when I was near finishing pharmacy school, I wasn't quite sure that it would be challenging enough for me. So I contemplated medical school. I took the MCATs, got accepted, but I chose not to pursue medical school. I instead got a doctorate in pharmacy. It was obviously not the number of years of education. And I had also started dating my future wife. And that was another influencing factor. So I got a doctorate in pharmacy, and then I followed that with a 2-year research fellowship. And then my first position was a faculty position teaching in the College of Pharmacy and the Department of Medicine at the University of Illinois.
Excellent. So did you think you were going to pursue an educational career then, as opposed to call it a worker career?
Yeah, I really did. I was really convinced that I was going to be a tenured professor in the university and do original and industry-sponsored research in the CNS area. It changed after a couple of years of working for the state of Illinois and not getting a pay raise. By coincidence, working in the pharmacokinetics laboratory, analyzing blood samples for a specific drug, I ran into an individual who asked me if I'd ever considered a career in the pharmaceutical industry. And after having a discussion with him, I just decided to go for that. And so for the last 30 years, I've had a career in the pharmaceutical industry.
And from what I remember, you were with G.D. Searle?
I was with GD Searle for a total of 7 years. I was with Abbott Laboratories for a couple of years. And in my current role at Astellas, I've been there. I just had my 15-year anniversary in July.
Okay. Let's switch gears. I'm sort of curious to know how you and Wally met.
So Wally and I met in pharmacy school. My wife was in a class 2 years behind me, and she asked me out on our first date. And it took a couple of dates for me to realize that it was the real deal.
So is she also a pharmacist then or not?
She is a pharmacist, yes. She practiced pharmacy for several years, maybe 5 years full-time, several years part-time while the children were young, but for the last 10 or more years, she hasn't practiced pharmacy.
So let's switch gears and talk about special needs, first on a personal level and then beyond. And let me first start by saying very sorry for the loss of one of your twins, Nicholas, at the time of his birth. What was the backstory? Was it a high-risk pregnancy just because you were having twins or not?
It wasn't. It was a very normal pregnancy with very normal doctor's visits. We were surprised that we were having twins. There was no fertility drugs involved. My wife's family does have a history of twins that run in the family. And so we were thrilled, having two girls, thinking that we will have a complete family with two girls and two boys. So it was, as I said, a very, very normal pregnancy. Ultrasounds, while one twin was slightly smaller, there was no concern raised by the OB. And my wife and I just decided to accompany her for a late pregnancy doctor's visit. So it was maybe a month before the scheduled delivery date. We knew that she would have a C-section. And I can just remember the look on the doctor's face, and he kept trying to hear the heartbeats. And he told us that he was very concerned because he was having a very hard time hearing one of the heartbeats. And so his office was very close to the hospital. He asked if we wanted an ambulance, but he wanted us to get to the hospital right away so that he could arrange for the delivery. I drove my wife. We went there as fast as we could. We got her into the delivery room. But by the time Nicholas was delivered, they weren't able to resuscitate him.
Wow.
And so they delivered Nicholas first in an effort to try to resuscitate him. When they told me that they couldn't, I just remember being in the delivery room praying over Nicholas. And they delivered David. I heard him cry. And the doctor came over to me, and his first words to me were that, we think your son might have Down syndrome. And I just remember looking at him, and I said to him, but he's alive, right? And I mean, that was the only focus of my day at that time. I wasn't going to put a label on him. I was just happy that he was alive, and regardless of what challenges there might be, it wasn't even something that entered my mind at that time.
That sounds like a very dramatic story. You go in for an ultrasound, sort of like a monthly checkup, and all of a sudden you're whisked over to the hospital, sort of like a ASAP type of thing. And I can only imagine what that must have been like. And your point about the Down syndrome being more of a secondary issue, right?
Right.
Because you're celebrating the fact that he's alive. And you might have taken that for granted had the situation with Nicholas not evolved the way you described it.
Exactly.
Yeah, my heart reaches out to you guys. But that was, 22 years ago now? 22
years ago. Yeah, it's coming up on the birthday's November 11th.
So before David's diagnosis with Down syndrome, did you or Wally have any experience with special needs?
Just in maybe a year and a half before David was born, a very close friends of ours from pharmacy school who were married had twins. One of their twins, the male twin, had Down syndrome. And that was really the only exposure that I had to Down syndrome.
So it's sort of a coincidental. You're both having twins, and one of the twins has Down syndrome.
Correct.
It's almost like lightning striking in a very similar pattern.
Exactly. And they lived in Downers Grove as well, just a few blocks from us. So it's a very unusual situation, I guess.
Yeah, well, when you take yourself back to that point in time, and obviously there's a lot of uncertainty and emotions running, but as the dust started to settle, where were you psychologically? What were some of the concerns or fears that you had early on?
Yeah, I mean, so, it was just a whirlwind of emotions at first, just trying to, I guess, accept the loss of Nicholas and trying to be the strong father figure, strong for my wife, strong for my daughters who were 5 and 7 at the time, who were just really thrown by everything because, as you can imagine, they had each planned on taking care of a baby and had picked out names and everything like that. And so for all of that, their dreams just to be dashed in a heartbeat, there was a lot to deal with at that time. But I also had to be strong for David. David had some medical challenges when he was born. His bone marrow wasn't producing platelets, and so they had to keep him in the hospital until his bone marrow kicked in, and fortunately it did on its own without any intervention. It was a lot for my wife to handle because he had low muscle tone. He had a poor sucking reflex, so nursing was an issue, and there was just a tremendous amount of sadness while we're trying to be grateful that we have this beautiful child in our house. So it was the whole gamut of emotions. I think for me, one of my concerns was, am I going to be a good enough dad for this special child? Am I going to give him the life that he deserves? Am I going to be able to provide for him? Am I strong enough, to be a good dad for him? That was what was going through my mind.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing, and I appreciate your authenticity. Was there any meaningful advice that you got early on that helped you put the Down syndrome diagnosis into perspective?
Well, I don't think we ever made an issue out of it. I think, because he survived, we had kind of made a pledge that we weren't going to treat him any differently. I mean, obviously we were going to meet his needs, but we were going to treat him the same as we did our 2 other children, and that we would nurture and motivate and inspire him. But we weren't going to give him a label. We weren't going to set limits for him. And I think that's why he's evolved to be just the tremendous young man that he is today.
That's fabulous.
I mean, clearly there were a lot of fears. I mean, I didn't know some of the medical complications, that he could potentially face. And we've been very blessed in that he's been very, very healthy. He's verbal. He's extremely active in many different activities. And I think it's a lot because of the way that we raised him. We didn't see him as being any different.
Yeah, well, I think that what I heard you saying is that you tried to attend to whatever his needs are, but you did everything with him, as whether he had Down syndrome or not.
Right.
What I've witnessed, Don, is that, and I know it's unintentional, but some families will coddle a child who has a weakness. Whatever the weakness is, it doesn't even have to be a special need. And what they don't realize inadvertently, that they're further handicapping their child.
Exactly.
By not, having high standards or high expectations and, hopefully helping them each reach their full potential. That's what you want for your kids anyway, whether they're typical or atypical. And thank you for being so articulate about that.
And David still tries to milk that. He'll say to my wife's birthday was on Halloween, and he said, "Mom, for your birthday, I'm going to let you make my breakfast for me." He's got a wicked sense of humor. But if you make an offer to do something for him, he will take you up on it. And so I've had to, growing up with my daughters, of course, that beautiful smile, they would do anything for him. And I'm like, no, you guys have to let him figure this out on his own.
Yeah, that's good. So speaking of his sisters, Anna and Marissa, I'm sort of curious to know what impact David's had on his sisters, your marriage, or the rest of your family for that matter.
Yeah, so he's had a tremendous impact. So, for example, with the time that David spent with the different therapists, whether it be speech therapy, physical therapy, occupational therapy, I think that was a huge influence on my 27-year-old daughter Marisa and her career decision to become a pediatric physical therapist. She has her doctorate in physical therapy. My older daughter Anna she works for Midtown Athletic Club, and I'm not sure what her exact title is, but she is in a customer service role, and I think just being in that role that she is in, she is just great in terms of her interactions with people. She's got tremendous interpersonal skills, combined with that strong work ethic that she inherited with my dad, has allowed her to be very successful in her career. And as when they were dating, I would always judge the boyfriends, the friends that came over, in terms of how they interacted with David. And if they didn't warm up to David, or if they were afraid of David or whatever, I always kind of let them know that wasn't maybe my first choice for them. So I'm blessed in that my oldest daughter's husband, Ben, is like a brother to David. He's a son to my wife and I, and he's a brother to David. And the bond that they have is very special. And my daughter Marisa's boyfriend as well, just equally, just the relationship that David has with John is very special.
Yeah, well, I'm interested to hear that, because they're not the first person who's mentioned that if you do have a child with special needs, that it's like a litmus test, right?
It is.
For the, boyfriend, girlfriend, depending on whether you have daughters or sons.
Right.
How do they interact with? How do they react to? And David obviously is such an integral part of your family. You couldn't accept somebody in your family who didn't get it, or didn't understand, or didn't embrace him for who he is. And, it's not a good or bad thing, but it's just one of those things, right? That you've sort of a built-in litmus test that you've had there all along these years.
Yeah, he's the nucleus of our family, is what I tell everyone. He's the glue that holds us together.
That's fabulous. So I'm sort of curious to know what supporting organizations you've relied on for David, or for the overall family, as he's been growing up.
Yeah, so we've been very involved with the Ray Graham Association. He's participated in a number of activities through Ray Graham, and Special Olympics has been a huge part. David's participated in basketball, in track, swimming, baseball. He's been riding horses at the Hansen Center, which is part of the Ray Graham, since he was 3 or 4. He's been completing in the equestrian events in Special Olympics since the age of 7 or 8. And if we weren't in the middle of the pandemic, he would have just had a competition in October, which, all of those events got canceled. We live in District 99. I mean, David played the baritone in the band. So imagine this little kid lugging this big baritone when he was in 5th grade. It was almost bigger than him. But he played it all through high school. One of the highlights of that was the District 99 high school bands won some big competition, and David's freshman year in high school got to play Carnegie Hall.
Oh my gosh.
So for me, it was such an emotional experience. It just to see your kid with Down syndrome on the stage playing Carnegie Hall, and I almost missed it. I was coming back from a business trip from Japan, and I was debating whether I should fly directly from Tokyo to New York, but I thought I would come to Chicago, and it was the end of February, early March, and a snowstorm, and 2 of my flights were canceled, and I literally got there right as I needed to get him backstage to get dressed and ready to perform, but I made the performance. But I was there was a part of me that was worried if I was ever going to make it, because my flight the day before was canceled. I was supposed to fly out the night before, have a family celebration. I literally got there hours before the actual performance. But I got to see him, and that was a highlight of a lifetime. So,
were you able to record the performance? Or?
Yes, my wife has it. Yes, yeah.
Well, that sounds like one of those special keepsake type experiences for the whole family, right? Not only for David, but for yourself, your wife, and the rest of your family. So
yeah, and it's kind of the philosophy because we always said to him, how do you get to Carnegie Hall? Practice, 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 and that's kind of the motto that we've had for him. For anything he does, he has to practice everything. It might take him a little bit longer, but with practice, he can do the same things that others without a disability can do.
Yeah, well, from your lips to God's ears, I'm hoping that anybody listening to this podcast will embrace, because that's all it is. It just takes people longer, right?
Exactly.
Some people have different talents, and if it's something that's on your heart or something that you have the will for, you just have to be persistent. So thanks again for sharing. So any other organizations or activities that come to mind that David's been involved in?
Yeah, Special Olympics has been the big one. He'll be leaving the transition program. He's going into a program called Eagles that will help to continue life skills. He'll be taking classes at College of DuPage. We just keep him so busy. He's a senior altar server in our parish. He has a green belt in a traditional karate class that's only 3 belts away from a black belt. He's probably right upstairs right now, taking his virtual drum lesson, and he works out with a personal trainer as well. So he's, we've done a lot of things that we would do with any of our children.
That's fabulous. Well, I think that one of our secrets raising our 5 kids was to make sure that they were always doing something. Idle time is the devil's playground, and sounds like you've also embraced that parenting philosophy, if you will.
Exactly.
Well, let's switch gears and talk about special needs beyond your own personal experience. And I'm sort of curious to know, how did you learn about this Dads of Steele, and what does the organization do?
Yeah, so I met David Steele, who is the founder of Dads of Steele, in early 2019. I'm pretty big into fitness and working out, and I was just looking through some different websites, and I saw this, and I was intrigued by it. So I went to their website, and I saw Dave's story, which I can share in a little bit. When I found out that he also worked out at the gym that I worked out, and my daughter was working there. I'm like, hey, do you know this person? And she says, yes, I do. We watch his daughter in Kidstown, which she was managing Kidstown at the time. And so she made the introduction to Dave, and I learned, more about his organization. Dave started the organization back in 2016 following the death of his infant daughter, Aubrey Violet. For Dave, as any parent goes through, following the loss of a child, I mean, you're lost, you're struggling. He had put on weight, he wasn't exercising, and Dave was a former college basketball player and very, very active. And he just had this vision of creating this organization that would bring dads together to motivate them, to encourage them, and to inspire each other. So it's become a place where dads can come together. They can share their successes. They can also share their struggles, and they can do that in a safe place, basically. The whole vision is that we want dads to become the best version of themselves that they can be for their families. And that's really where Dads of Steele has come from. So in late 2019, Dave converted Dads of Steele from an LLC to a not-for-profit. A board of directors was created. I was asked by Dave to join the board of directors, and we've done some good things, but we're challenged now by what we can do with the current COVID pandemic. We've got some great ideas.
Well, I'm very inspired by the work that you're doing. And it's so consistent with what we're doing with the 21st Century Dads Foundation, about helping dads become the best version of themselves. We talk about it, dads being present physically, emotionally, spiritually in their children's lives. And I know that that's something that you both share in common, that you both lost a child early on. Is that the common thread with all the dads who are involved with Dads of Steele, or not necessarily?
No, but right now that's probably one of the platforms that we can continue to advance during this time. We have a group that we started back in March of Grieving Dads, we call it, our Grieving Dads group. We get together every Sunday morning for an hour via WebEx, and it's a very safe place where we can come and talk about our feelings. I know for both Dad and for me, certainly almost 22 years ago now, there were many resources for moms, but there weren't a lot of resources for dads. And dads, handle grief differently, but dads grieve. It just wasn't comfortable. Even my closest friends, I had a hard time opening up to them because they had never gone through this type of loss before. And so we wanted to create this Grieving Dads group to bring dads together where they could be very open and vulnerable and share their feelings. And I'll tell you, we've got a regular following. Any given day we'll have as few as 4, as many as 10, but we're really trying to get the word out there. We've got a regular from the Netherlands who dials in every Sunday from the Netherlands, another person from Tennessee, a number of people that are local, but we had them from all other states. And we're really just trying to build our message. We have topics that we talk about. I think one of the neat things that we're doing is we're collecting content. And I think we will be developing like a one-page sheet that can be distributed to dads at a hospital who have lost a child. We have enough content that we hope to write a book in the future as well. I think there just needs to be more resources out there for dads so that they know that they're not alone in their grief journey.
Yeah, well, I think it's amazing what you guys are doing. I remember from a prior conversation, it's the top 10 things you'd tell a grieving dad who's lost a child. Is that what you're referring to, that one-page sheet?
Well, yeah, we were going to do like the top 5 to 10 things that you would share with the dad. We've also, want to develop one on like the first holidays, like how to get through the first holidays. There's a number of these one-pagers, but we also, have enough content. I think that we could write a book because there are just so many situations that you end in, and there are times even for me, our loss has been 22 years. There are times when just out of nowhere, this wave of grief will come over you and you can't suppress it and you are confused by where it's coming from, but it happens. And we just want dads to know that those are all normal feelings. And I think we have some great material. I mean, it's a club that no one wants to be a part of, but we're all part of it and we're all united by, something common, whether you lost your child at birth or whether you lost your child to cancer at an older age or due to trauma. It's still a loss, and it's something that stays with you for the rest of your life.
Yeah, well, very powerful, very profound. Thank you for doing the work that you're doing. And we should probably circle back a couple years down the road just to see how some of these things have transpired. So I'm sort of curious to know, what role has spirituality played in your lives?
Yeah, so while I wasn't raised Catholic, I converted to Catholicism after the birth of our daughter Marisa. So I've been a faithful Catholic for the last 27 years. My wife is Cuban. Her Catholic identity is extremely important to her. And for us, I really think it was our faith community that helped us get through our loss. My daughters were enrolled in Catholic school at the time, and just the love and support from the families. We probably never had to make a meal for the first 3 months. When we brought David home, there was just a tremendous outpouring of love and support. So our Catholic identity and our Catholic faith is very, very important in our lives. And as I said, David's a senior altar server, and it's very important for him. David is always the one who will just hears some bad news, and no matter where he is, he'll just say, "Dad, let's stop and pray about this." And it's just, it's from his lips to God's ears. I'm convinced of that.
Yeah, well, that's fabulous. Thank you so much for sharing. I'm thinking about advice now, and I'm wondering if there's, beyond the conversation we've had, if there's any advice that you would want to share with a dad or parent, for that matter, who's raising a child with differences.
Yeah, I was very early on. I just, I wasn't living in the moment. I was like planning for the future, reflecting on the past. Just live in the moment. Enjoy the small achievements. Celebrate the small things. Don't sweat the small stuff. I know that sounds a bit cliche, but for David too, it was, don't focus on what he can't do. Celebrate his differences, but don't set limits for your child either. Don't tell him, "Oh, you won't be able to do that." Let him try it. I mean, just for us, I think for me, I was very, very, very career focused. In one of my roles was global. So I was, traveling the globe, and I was, for my daughters, I probably missed a number of their milestones, but for David, his learning to walk, his learning to stand, to crawl, to stand, to walk, we made parties out of all of those types of things, and just really, really celebrate the small things. It just, it brings joy and happiness. But really, live in the moment. Yeah, you do have to plan for the future, but just enjoy every day with your child.
Yeah, well, words of wisdom. Thank you again for sharing. I'm sort of wondering, why is it that you've agreed to be a mentor father as part of the Special Fathers Network?
I think I have a lot of experience that I can share. I've been around the block. I've got 22 years of experience with David. And I just think for me to be able to give back and share maybe some of the struggles that I've faced and how I've worked to overcome them, or where I've failed, to share those experiences with other dads. I didn't have that type of resource for me, but I think for me, I've kind of got a servant leadership mentality. It's all about it's about giving back.
Well, we're thrilled to have you. Thank you again for being involved. Let's give a special shout out to Dave Steele of Dads of Steele for helping connect us. I'm wondering if there's anything you'd like to say before we wrap up.
No, just, thank you for this discussion today. I mean, it's, having a child with a disability has been a true blessing for us. And I think, while individuals that, may be differently abled, they have no limits. So don't set limits for your child, and just give them these experiences. And the return that you will get is exponential. Just a true blessing.
That's fabulous. So if somebody wants to learn more about Dads of Steele or to contact you, what's the best way to do that?
They can either go to our website, which is www.dadsofsteele, and that's STEELE.org, or they can send me an email directly at don@dadsofsteele.com.
Excellent. We'll include those in the show notes, so it'll make it as easy as possible for somebody to learn about the organization or to reach out to you. Don, thank you for your time and many insights. As a reminder, Don is just one of the dads who's part of the Special Fathers Network, a mentoring program for fathers raising a child with special needs. If you'd like to be a mentor father or are seeking advice from a mentor father with a similar situation to your own, please go to 21stCenturyDads.org. Thank you for listening to the latest episode of the Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. As you probably know, the 21st Century Dads Foundation is a 501c3 not-for-profit organization, which means we need your help to keep our content free to all concerned. Would you please consider making a tax-deductible contribution? I would really appreciate your support. Don, thanks again.
Thank you.
And thank you for listening to the Dad to Dad podcast, presented by the Special Fathers Network. The Special Fathers Network is a dad-to-dad mentoring program for fathers raising children with special needs. Through our personalized matching process, new fathers with special needs children connect with mentor fathers in a similar situation. It's a great way for fathers to support fathers. Go to 21stcenturydads.org. That's 21stcenturydads.org.
And if you're a dad looking for help or would like to offer help, we would be honored to have you join our closed Facebook group. Please go to facebook.com/groups and search Dad to Dad. Also, please be sure to register for the Special Fathers Network bi-weekly Zoom calls held on the first and third Tuesdays of every month. Lastly, we're always looking to share interesting stories. If you'd like to share your story or know of a compelling story, please send an email to david@21stcenturydads.org.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please be sure to subscribe on iTunes or wherever you listen. The Dad to Dad podcast was produced by Couch Audio for the Special Fathers Network. Thanks again to Reuben Law for supporting the Dad to Dad podcast. Call Reuben Law at 847-279-7999 and mention the Special Fathers Network for a free consultation. 847-279-7999.